talk about all of that with Lauren. She's going to kick us off, though, by giving us a sense of the Wayfair strategy and how they're looking at this space and how they're looking at this challenge of moving and expanding the brand into new categories. So I'm going to let you take it away for a minute, and then I'm going to join you with some questions.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. And after all this, you might be a little disappointed. The slides aren't the most groundbreaking thing you'll see, but we'll lean into it anyways. So like Steve mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of the Wayfair brand and how TV has really changed to support and enable that evolution. And so can we go to, are we set up on? Yes. Again, not the most groundbreaking slides, but we'll go with it. So I want to start by talking about Wayfair's more just broadly our approach to marketing, because we tend to do things a little differently than a lot of other advertisers. So first, we look at everything in terms of incremental revenue. So every channel is trying to quantify, what was the revenue that came from that additional exposure. So we're not necessarily trying to find our customers where they're consuming media. Instead, we're trying to find the potential customers that need us to come to site and convert. And so every channel looks at, everything through the realm of incremental revenue. And we use that incremental revenue for every channel to build an efficiency target. And again, every marketing channel, even TV and offline channels, we're all looking at hitting that efficiency target on the nose, thinking like, we don't want to be over efficient because then we're leaving scale on the table. We don't want to be inefficient because that one's a little more obvious and self-explanatory. And then the second piece is we don't use budgets in the way that most companies do. So this, I didn't make this slide, so if you don't like it, I'm sorry. This top chart here kind of shows a little bit how we approach spend in marketing. So there's no marketing gets X amount of money in a given year and then teams fight for their share of that. Instead, every marketing channel builds their spend from the bottoms up. And so we look at our efficiency targets that we have that I just talked about, all in the lens of incremental revenue. And then we basically say, okay, based on our micro metrics like, response rate, CPMs, cost per spike visit, and then looking at efficiency at a network level, we basically build our media plan from the bottoms up to say, okay, we think that we can spend this much money, and that's exactly the spend threshold that we will hit our efficiency target at. And again, these forecasts are all very fluid. So if we are over efficient, we want to be able to react very quickly, ramp up spend. If we are inefficient, hopefully that doesn't happen, but we want to be able to do the same. So taking those two pieces through the lens of TV marketing, we have an efficiency target that is largely based on kind of our broader channel goal, which is driving first-time purchases. So our efficiency target looks at the average time to convert for new purchasers, and it ultimately looks at our incrementality and how much we're driving new customers to site. And then from there, again, we kind of build our forecasts from the bottoms up and stay fairly fluid with that. So with all of that context, can we go to the next slide? This one's a little nicer because you could tell corporate comms made this one. So this slide here really just talks about kind of where Wayfair is at. And we like to think that approach that we've taken to marketing and being very performance focused and very nimble has enabled a lot of this. So Wayfair has become a household brand name in North America, in Canada and the US, I'll say. We have reached about 85% aided awareness, which is great. People know us. And we're also excited by this fact in the bottom left. In the US and Canada, we're actually the #1 place that consumers think to shop for their home online. Again, we think, okay, a lot of this was Wayfair marketing helped enable all of this growth. And so can we go to the next slide? Okay, and this is the last slide, so there won't be too many more of these. But the piece I want to focus on here, because this kind of more broadly talks about where Wayfair is headed, how we think, we're well positioned to take more of the total addressable market in the home space. But I want to focus on the table to the left, so that U.S. home category B2C online penetration. It's something that, I think we all know the home category by and large has been a little bit slower to shift to online than a lot of other categories. Clearly, 2020 had some tailwinds that helped boost that to 21%. But overall, it's largely a brick and mortar space. And then I want to focus on this yellow bar, that 50+%. So that represents the highly penetrated categories within the home space. So these are the ones like, I mean, more like tchotchke type things, the small decor, your like throw pillows, maybe it's your hand towels, the things that have largely transitioned online anyways. And at this point, those have been pretty core to Wayfair's growth. We have, again, very high aided awareness in those categories, and those are like our bread and butter categories. And so knowing that, the 21% kind of takes a different light. All of a sudden, that 21%, I mean, it includes all those categories that are largely online anyways. And so we kind of used that to realize like we have to evolve our strategy. Like we've, the world is online with a lot of those like smaller parcel decor items, but the world is not online yet for a lot of those categories that go into that 21%. So I know Steve mentioned some like large appliances, mattresses, the things that I think a lot of us are guilty of saying like, oh, I want to go to the store and test it out first before I buy. And so with that, we've kind of reached an inflection point and are pursuing, I'll say like our next generation of TV marketing. So we're not necessarily abandoning the thought that our goal as a channel is to drive new customers to convert. But now we're realizing like there's this whole opportunity for us to build that awareness within these like subscale categories. And we think that TV is a great lever to do that. But again, I talked about like our efficiency targets and everything that we plan. We had been optimizing for all those, like we were saying, largely at the top of the funnel, optimizing for those first time purchasers. And in this new world, I mean, there are a lot of people that shop at Wayfair, get all their linens on Wayfair, but have no idea that they can also get the mattress that their linens go on at Wayfair. And so our opportunity is not just at the top of the funnel, it's now educating customers through the full funnel on the breadth of our selection and categories. And so with that, we've had to kind of reevaluate a lot of our approach to TV marketing. So the measurement piece, I talked about how, again, incremental revenue is like our guiding principle always. And so with incremental revenue, a lot of our TV attribution was ultimately built on first-time purchasers. We felt like our mandate was to drive those people to convert. And so that's how we were going to measure the success of our campaigns. And all of a sudden, that's kind of out the window. We've had to expand our attribution to look at decay rate beyond first-time purchases and try to figure out, how much is TV driving if someone who's made 10 purchases with Wayfair in the past finally bought a dishwasher with us. Like, what is TV's value there? And so we've had to expand our attribution to be more full funnel. And then the other piece of measurement that we've had to think about is like a big input to driving people to convert in these categories. And these are like largely big ticket categories like renovation. Like you're likely not buying a bathtub once every couple weeks, or I'm not. So I need to make different friends if you guys are. But ultimately, these are big ticket items that people, it takes a long time for people to purchase. They're not in the market for these things all the time. And so we're realizing first we need to build awareness of our offerings in these categories before it's going to translate into, driving people to ultimately purchase these products on site. And so we're realizing like we can't only look at efficiency, which is like sacrilegious at Wayfair. Like we are so performance focused that like the pivot away from efficiency as our sole KPI has been pretty monumental. And so we're looking at things like, I know brand equity was mentioned yesterday. We're looking at brand equity. We're looking at, movement along key brand perceptions. And that's like a wild notion at Wayfair. I know a lot of you guys are like, oh, we do brand lift studies all the time, but it's very different than how we've done things in the past. And then the other piece that we've had to change a lot is our planning process. So again, we planned everything bottoms up, looking at like which networks are the most untapped and driving the most incremental revenue for us. And now we're no longer necessarily looking at that. Now we have to look at things like, okay, all of our campaigns are now kind of telling slightly different messages. It used to be all of our creatives laddered up to one message and it was building awareness to drive people to convert. And now we have a bunch of different messages in the market. So we have to think a little more granularly. And so we're planning against things like reach and frequency, which again, in this room, I know you guys are like, welcome to the club, but we are finally using those inputs because we're realizing like now that we have more nuance to our campaigns that are live, like we have to start looking, we have to make sure that people are seeing our ads the right number of times and that we're reaching, the right number of people. And I say reach and frequency because we are prioritizing the inputs there. We're not looking at ratings in aggregate. We care more about, where each of those numbers is landing. And then the last piece is creative. Like our creative team we do everything in-house, and our creative team has been amazing evolving to this switch. But it used to be kind of like all of our ads were, I'm not going to say like a playbook was in place, but they were all fairly similar and they were all touting the same categories and the same messages. So everything laddered up to one broader goal, and that's no longer the case. So now we have to figure out like, how can we build credibility in all of these cases? And how can we make sure that the customer sees our ad and immediately says, oh, that tabletop ad with like small appliances and that KitchenAid mixer, that was Wayfair. Great. Now I know that Wayfair sells those. So it's required a huge shift in our strategy. And hopefully you guys have started to see some of our emerging category ads. I can't remember what date it is. We either have Reno or tabletop on right now, but please come to site immediately after you see it. So it's been a pretty big shift, and we're realizing like this is going to be a very long-term play for us. It took us about 8 to 10 years to build that broader brand awareness in our core categories. And we're trying to accelerate that a bit and say, okay, we have this like F&D world we've largely become dominant in. And sorry if any Amazon people are here, but this F&D world that we feel like we've largely become dominant in. And now we're trying to get there across about 5 or 6 different categories in that same time frame. So with that, Steve.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. That sets us up. Do you want to stay standing? Are you more comfortable standing, or this?
I'm good with either.
Because this bespeaks male privilege. It's funny that how you sort of underscore how much of a culture shift this requires. We have our own D2C show here, so I'm very familiar with the ways in which sort of performance monsters like Wayfair work and the mindset, and that what you're talking about and growing into new categories really is a cultural marketing mind shift for the people within the company. Tell us about one of the key challenges have been in meeting that. I mean, you've told us how deep the challenge is for a company like yours. What are some of the key challenges you've met along the way in making that shift, either internally, staff-wise, technology-wise?
So again, internally, it's been like it's been like 2 years in the making that we've been trying to get people on board to this idea that we have to take a long-term view to the revenue play here. Like we have to look at reach and frequency, and we have to make sure that people are seeing our ads enough to actually internalize it. And again, this room is like very familiar with that, but that's not something that Wayfair ever did. But I would say there are beyond that, there are kind of 2 big challenges that we're very focused on, avoiding the potential pitfalls of. One is we want to make sure we can sustain awareness in these categories. I think we've like all seen campaigns where someone goes super, super heavy on TV for 3 months and they gain all these awareness points, and then they pull off, and then 2 months later, they've lost all those points. And we want to make sure that this isn't a futile effort, and that these are all sustained. So we've kind of done a couple things to address that. One is that we've selected, overall, technically we have like 15 emerging categories. We've selected a handful of them that we're really focusing on. And so it's going to give each category a little more airtime throughout the year. And then the other thing is we're doing an always on approach to remarketing and retargeting for these categories on CTV to help bolster support there. And then we're also having, outside of TV, digital channels are continuing to support these categories throughout the year. So we're hoping that will help there. And then the other big challenge has just been the creative piece. Like, again, we do everything in-house. We have a production team, and they're like wizards. They're great, but this is like a huge shift because these categories themselves are so different. So we have like storage and org, which is largely unbranded, low margins, commoditized. Like the things that are going to, like the VPs in a storage and org ad are very different than those in a large appliances ad or a Reno ad, where, it's the brands that get us credibility. And so our creative team has been really good at making the shift and recognizing the nuances between categories, but it's a whole different way of thinking for us.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question, but I want to go into it a little more, which is how do you, now you're competing against a whole set of endemics. I mentioned to you that I just had to buy a new dryer because it was squeaking so loud. My dog was complaining. My default was to go to Home Depot and eventually got it from Best Buy. How do you capture me? How do you conquest me?
So on the kind of TV planning side, a lot of these categories are, a lot of home categories tend to be the women in the home are the decision makers and the purchasers. And we realize that a lot of these big ticket categories, that's not necessarily the case. So we're shifting our targeting to be a little broader and not as focused on that like core female, older skewing demographic. So that's one piece. And the other thing is all about the creatives that we're putting on air. So these are like large appliances. I imagine you went with like a Frigidaire, a Samsung. I imagine you went with a big name brand. I think
LG. LG.
Yes.
We had to match this washer.
Yes. Okay. So you went with LG. So the credibility in the large appliances space, the way that we can get those gains against a Best Buy, a Home Depot, a Lowe's, it comes from getting credit for the fact that we carry all of those brands. So we've really worked on, I hope that some people have seen the large appliances ads that we've had in the wild for the past, on and off for the past year, but those ads focus explicitly on the brands that we carry. And so we've done some supplier funded marketing efforts with GE, for example, to make sure that GE gets airtime in our commercials. And so we think that getting credit for carrying the brands that consumers trust is going to be key in driving that consideration piece.
I know we have some online questions, so while we're piping in Lisa to bring them in, let me ask another about the brand and performance equation now, because now you've got the lift. Now you have to generate equity in associating the Wayfair brand with a whole set of other categories. And yet at the same time, you have at your core this performance sensibility. How are you balancing brand and performance now?
This is like the golden question. I feel like we historically, even though we've always been a performance marketer, I feel like we've historically kind of swung the pendulum back and forth a bit, where we've been thinking, okay, we need to focus explicitly on performance, like revenue is the end all be all, we don't care about awareness points or whatever. And then I think we feel like, okay, our brand image is suffering, our awareness is suffering, quick, swing the pendulum back. And so we're kind of taking our short-term approach to this is we're still looking at efficiency, but again, we're working into our calculus, things like awareness, campaign recall, all of those pieces. And we're like quantifying the impact of those. And then the longer term goal though, is like, again, we just are never gonna not be a super performance driven marketer. Mm-hmm. So the long-term goal is like, we're really working to revamp all of our attribution systems to make sure that we are capturing the broader halo effect of TV and the halo effect that comes from that awareness.
Let me see, do we have Lisa in?
Yep.
Type in Lisa, because I know we have questions from online.
Yes. Okay. For first, hi, Lauren. For our first question, it is, does your brand awareness KPIs extend to digital video buys? And what are some of your new emerging media channels?
So one thing that part of how I think we've been able to push this through internally, again, at a very performance focused company, is that we are isolating the impact of TV on all of these awareness plays. And so the digital channels that have a few more touch points, a little more tracking at their fingertips, they are still primarily looking at revenue versus looking at the awareness piece. And so all of our gains in campaign recall, brand equity, all of that, we are isolating for what TV is driving and making sure that TV is over indexing versus broader brand progress there to feel good about our strategies. And then in terms of emerging channels, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but CTV, we are like very heavily leaning into. This is one that we are really excited about. We think that it will not only complement this new emerging category strategy, but just that, I mean, we need it to complement linear given what's been happening. And then the other emerging channel that we're, again, like a lot of you, leaning heavily into is YouTube. We're seeing YouTube as this opportunity for us to really be like content authorities. And so some of the play there will essentially be making sure that we're touting these categories through our YouTube content.
Lisa, did you have another question too?
No, that was it.
Okay, let me ask you about, and by the way, guys, raise your hand. I'll come out to you with the mic if you've got a question to ask Lauren. In the meantime, let me ask you about attribution modeling, because I know that you guys, it's something that again is core to you. But tell us a little, bring us inside some of the attribution modeling you're doing for these cross-screen video campaigns.
Yeah, so I talked a lot about the sense of incrementality. So what we are always trying to pinpoint is like, we want to isolate the effect of that additional exposure. We never, like maybe someone sees an ad on HGTV and then comes to site and purchases within a few days. That's great. But like, how do we know that we were the reason that they purchased? And so that's what we're always trying to pinpoint. So we have a whole like host of inputs that we use. So for example, we use smart TV panel data and clickstream data with our own like proprietary machine learning algorithm to try to retroactively pinpoint which viewers have been TV influenced. We also look a lot at those we look a lot at spike visits and the trends that we're seeing with our spike visitors and the marketing visitor types that we're seeing there to help inform things. But what we try to do largely is we try to basically keep every channel in a silo when it comes to measurement, because we want to make sure that we feel good that TV on its own is driving X amount of revenue and that online video, not even online video, it's too broad, but programmatic desktop online video is driving X amount of inventory. So we actually try really hard to isolate it at the channel level versus looking at it holistically, because we think that that's what ultimately allows us to be the most efficient and like optimize most effectively.
But at the same time, you're trying to isolate the consumer on their journey. Because I think another thing that you said is rather than simply wanting to be where the consumer is, you want to be able to be to understand where they are in the customer journey, so you know when to nudge them. Tell us a little bit about that model and how it's different from simply being where they are.
Yes. So I'll start with TV, which is, I feel like, a little less exciting on the linear side with how we do this. But we largely look at, so we use our smart TV panel data to get a sense of the incremental revenue that each network is driving each day part, each creative, et cetera. And so we use that, and then different marketing visitor type trends, and the, again, all based on spike visit piece to get a sense of where our current consumers are not watching, or I'll say where our current consumers are watching. And then we essentially shift our linear media plan to largely avoid them, because again, they don't need us. They don't need our additional touch point to convert. On the digital side, we're doing a lot of, I feel like we are leaning very heavily into suppressing screens that have seen certain ads that we've had, and we're working on some more like cross-channel initiatives with, especially on the social side, to bring social into the equation. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Lawrence, and look, you guys are amazing. I think all I have to do is think about Wayfair and I get an email.